as a journalist, you cannot present disinformation as information, and you need to clearly label it as disinformation. And in this case, people often say, "Oh, that's your opinion. That's not proper journalistic work. You need to just present the Russian perspective as a perspective."
Hello and welcome back. This is the 18th episode of the Covering Ukraine podcast. My name is Oksana Mamchenkova and I'm a Kyiv-based project coordinator for the Europe-Ukraine desk and your host on this podcast. This episode is dedicated to one of our Kyiv Media Hub events that took place in Kyiv in October 2024, where two prominent journalists discussed the challenges of covering Ukraine for German media. As we found out from this conversation, the German media coverage of Ukraine is a fascinating example of a fast evolution. Over the last decade, Ukraine has changed from a country almost unknown to most Germans to a regular subject on the TV and radio and the written media. How did this transformation occur, and is it ongoing? What factors have shaped the German media landscape and newsroom approach to a coverage of Ukraine? And, importantly, what challenges do journalists for the German media face when they tackle the Ukrainian issue?
Let's maybe stay in that period of time, 2014. Back then, I was studying politics and history, and I was following the debates in Germany, especially in talk shows. You had many people there who were saying, yeah, it's very complicated, you need to see it from the start, and Russia was betrayed. And this was kind of a very common narrative in Germany. Also, there was a huge journalistic discussion between, can we call it a war or not, what is happening in Donbass, or is it just a regional conflict within Ukraine, like, again, clear Russian narrative.
This is Vassili Golod, an editor for German public service broadcaster ARD. He was born in Kharkiv, and when he was 2 years old, his family moved to Germany. In 2023, ARD opened their office in Kyiv.
Time I started working here is connected to this war of aggression that started on the 24th of February 22. And first we were reporting as ARD a lot from Germany. We had colleagues here, we had a lot of reporters here. And exactly 1 year ago, we officially opened our studio, which is really a historical step because for many, many years, ARD did not open bureaus. We had the biggest public broadcaster in Germany. And like many other Western media, we had an office in Moscow, still have it. But in the past, this office was covering all countries around Russia, which was a historic decision back then, which also back then was maybe not the right decision. But now we have a studio here, we have 4 correspondents here who are constantly here. We have a team of producers, of cameramen, we have editors, and we are reporting actually every day on Ukraine and on things that are going on here. But maybe first, maybe you can tell something about your work, because I kind of described I'm working within a structure. It's a public broadcaster, it's a very big organization. You're working as a freelancer for different media, mainly for taz. Maybe you can describe how your work changed during the years.
And this is Anastasia Rodi, a Ukraine reporter for taz, a German independent daily newspaper. Her experience is closely linked to the war in Ukraine. In 2014, when the Russo-Ukrainian war began, Anastasia was forced to move away from her hometown of Sevastopol in Crimea, which was occupied by the Russian army. This offensive changed her life. She put aside her dream of becoming a university lecturer and found a job as a reporter instead. She recalls the time when the German media did not perceive the annexation of Crimea as an act of war, which was a difficult period for her country.
In 2013, I wrote my first article for the taz, so almost 12 years will be soon. And it was 9 months before the Euromaidan. I just wrote it because I was on the fellowship, something like a workshop. And yes, I wrote about Crimean Tatars in Ukraine and on Peninsula. And when Euromaidan started, my frozen contact with editor back again to life. And she asked me, could you write a text about the reaction on Peninsula on Euromaidan in Kyiv? Okay, not a problem. Back that time I wrote in Russian. My editor translated to German because my German was really poor that time. And after the first so-called Green Mansion, but now we all call them directly Russian soldiers, appeared on the streets of my hometown, I was reporting fast on the daily basis from Ukraine. I was reporting on annexation, then I forced to leave Peninsula. I landed in Lviv, but still continued to work as a reporter. I forgot about my ideas to be a professor because it was not relevant anymore for me, and I understood that I have this power to spread message despite the disinformation and despite the narratives about pro-Russian Crimea. And I just found my power in telling the stories of people to bear witness of these war crimes back that time. In 2014, we never told about Russian war crimes on this stage. I mean, so yes, it's illegal annexation, but. I spoke directly about it, and then I started to cover a war in Donbass, also for the Tats and other media as a freelancer. And till now freelancer, this is the best way for me to do my job, to make decisions what I'm covering and how. Yeah, so there is no place in Ukraine that I haven't been this 11 years. Some of them are not existing anymore, unfortunately. Yeah, but I have stories from these places as well. In all of them were written for the German media. Yeah, it's really challenging for me personal, not only as a journalist, but as a person who are from Ukraine. But this challenge is less changed actually, because I face this challenge every day. And I'm frustrated, to be honest. But this is the question for me also personal. Should I leave the profession because I'm so frustrated, or should I write on daily basis until this narrative will be more marginal as a narrative about the real situation? Of course, I think now we have more, it's not parity yet, but fast parity between two opinions, what we can see on the pages or on TV shows in Germany. But the second side is spread not, on my opinion, less from journalists, but more from experts, so-called experts and politicians. I think for journalists and experts who are real experts in Eastern Europe, it's much more easy to communicate directly these messages. I think you are doing this in your job as well. You're analyzing it and just bring facts to your auditorium. So my question would be to you as well. You already mentioned that a lot of German media wasn't presented here, only from time to time from Russia or Moscow covering Ukraine. 2015, if I'm not mistaken, Deutsche Welle opened the office here for the first time. Other newspapers tried to bring correspondence. But do you see from other colleagues that there is a trend that more constant correspondents are now in Ukraine, covering Ukraine from Ukraine? Or is it still depends on the situation on the front line or political?
It's a very interesting question. And first I would say maybe one point. Yes, back then we had colleagues who had the studio in Moscow, but who were very often in Ukraine, who also lived here for months and were covering Ukraine very, very well, also with the help of local producers who are key for our work. And the problem was mainly that we had like parallel movements, like you had great correspondents who were clearly, many of them understanding the situation, analyzing it very clearly, and at the same time you had a clear false balance in talk shows, in the public debate. I would argue it's better now, it changed. There is still false balance, and I think it's better for the reason because people are here. First of all, we opened a studio, which is a big thing. Our colleagues from Die Zeit have a correspondent with Olivia Cortas who lives here, who covers Ukraine. And there are other media who don't have a permanent correspondent here, but who have always at least one person here and who are covering everything that is happening in Ukraine. I think it helps, it made a change. But I would also argue that there is still a difference if you have changing reporters here who come here and report mainly on things related to war. And like us, for example, who are living here and who also do stories that are not directed to war, but it's still more than just the war. The society is special, the culture is special, and people in Germany had no clue what Ukraine is before, I would even argue, 2022. And it's also part of our job as a public broadcaster to show from different perspectives what this country is about. And there is also this very difficult debate because we are talking about Germany tonight. And in Germany, you always, as a journalist, you learn there is one perspective, there is another perspective. You just describe it and the viewer is smart enough to understand it, which is fine, more or less, if you're in a democratic country where the goal of information is to inform. But dealing with Russia, everyone who knows what Russia is and how Russia works, and especially how Russian propaganda works, understands that you have clear disinformation on one side. And as a journalist, you cannot present disinformation as information, and you need to clearly label it as disinformation. And in this case, people often say, oh, that's your opinion. That's not proper journalistic work. You need to just present the Russian perspective as a perspective. And I think there was a time frame where there was no real discussion about it. It started on the 24th of February 22, and it was there for 3 months. And then it slowly started shifting back again because people started getting tired from the war and started searching for more simple solutions. And as you cannot influence what Russia is doing, some people started trying to influence what is happening in Ukraine. This is kind of something I have realized or witnessed. I don't know how you see it, how big of a problem you see false balance.
It was also a question for me, why it is so, because the annexation of Crimea, absolutely illegal act of aggression, was done in 2014. It means that 8 years, it was something, we can deal with it and to find a compromise. I think even now, looking on the political debate in Germany, we see that the roots of these narratives are still presented. And for me, it's also a question what we are doing wrong as a journalist. Is it our task at all? Or just to inform and to bring more context and to leave it? Because I hear often from the colleagues that this is not our task to change societies. It's just to bring information, and other institutions should well-educated people. Maybe you can react on this, or we need to push our agenda and to bring truth on the table every morning to the people.
My understanding of journalism is that journalists should never have an agenda. The main task of a journalist is to cover things, to be there as a reporter where things are happening and to report on these things. But, and this but is important, you need to give people context. If the news do not deliver context, it's difficult to understand the news in the right way. This is our job. And maybe one example regarding Crimea. When, like in my final paper at university, I was comparing how Russian state media and German public television were covering the annexation of Crimea. And what was interesting is that on Russian media is clear. They had like a full 15-minute piece, everything what Putin said, and without any context, this is the right way to understand it, how Putin put it. In German media, you had a first piece, 3 minutes, in the main news magazine, which was just a wrap-up of everything that Putin said. So, historic Russian territory, fake news, but this is what he said. There was no blood, no war, all went fine. Not correct, but also what he said. And after this, you had a very intelligent professor who in a 7-minute interview was in a very complicated way was explaining why all this, what Putin said, is not correct and not by law, and it's a big mistake. But the framing was set already. So people had the frames in their heads, which they still have, that it's complicated with Crimea, it's historic Russian territory and so on. And now, even like 10 years later, it's difficult you're still fighting against those narratives. And then you had like complicated words, annexation, separatists. You had like peace negotiations where Russia was not sitting at the table as a conflict party, but as someone who wants to help solving the problem. So there were a lot of basics that were delivered in a wrong way. And this is why my understanding of good journalism is no agenda, but giving people context so that they understand it, and also not using complicated words, because we only use complicated words when we do not fully understand what we are talking about. So we need to fully understand what we are reporting on, and then have to, in simple, clear words, explain to our viewers and listeners what's going on.
This is really challenging for us as a journalist. So maybe we are risking our lives to bring reports, and then people watch, said, yes, it's really good job, but we don't believe you. Is it something that happened to you from time to time? Because you also become feedbacks or comments on your work, how you deal with it and how you explain the situation?
I think there will be always people who do not believe you, people who do not trust journalism, but there are many, many people who do. There are many people who value what you are doing, what we are doing, what other colleagues are doing. And I would say for Germany, from everything I see and analyze, it's the majority. I would also say it's always important to kind of understand a society. Sometimes I meet people in Ukraine who say, what's wrong with Germany? They have so much money, they have so much influence in Europe. They have also their own historic experience with dictatorship, and they are only at this stage because others helped them, which means defeating them. And kind of it's necessary now to help Russia in a way by defeating them. Why don't they understand it? And I think it's connected the other way around. Germany, because of their own historic experience, is a very pacifist country. People do not want to hear the word war. They want to help people. Many still cannot understand that weapons can help. Many years ago, I also didn't think that weapons could help Ukraine. I thought diplomacy could help Ukraine. And I think Germany as a country is still in the process of learning. When we look back, the whole process this country went through within 2 years, from 5,000 helmets to tanks and air defense systems and other things, it's kind of huge. On the other hand, from the Ukrainian perspective, it's not enough. It's still not enough. People die every day. What we as journalists, last point, can do is to give people the information. We did this year a documentary on 10 years of war. And many people were asking, like, no, the war it's 2 years of war. We're like, no, it's 10 years of war, because taking the territory from another country, attacking another country militarily, it's a war. It's like by definition a war. And many people wrote long emails and were like, oh, I didn't think about it. I had like no connection between what happened back then and what's happening now. So I think we can make a difference with our work. We also have to accept that it's sometimes maybe not as quick as we would like it to be, because we see the facts and here everything looks very clear. But I'm curious in one point, because you mentioned how you have been covering in 2014 and you're covering now, and you were like, it's still false balance and still very bad. Do you see any way a shift, a change also in newsrooms, or do you have the same discussions as you had 10 years ago?
When I was covering Ukraine in 2014, it was, of course, for many people shock, and they want to have as much stories as possible from Ukraine. But after the Minsk II, February 2015, a lot of journalists left Ukraine, and actually there was also a big lack of stories from Ukraine, so much more or less. Back then, when the military actions were more or less frozen, I tried to tell stories about people, so how they live in this condition. It was something really challenging as well, because unfortunately there are a lot of other conflicts in the world. And I often hear questions, there is a second war in Ukraine. No, it isn't second war. It was still war all these years, as you already mentioned. Yeah, people somehow forget about it. But challenging for me was what first changes. Back then, it was me and 2 other colleagues who cover Ukraine for the newspaper. Now we have constant 6 people who write in about Ukraine and from Ukraine. I would say that in our editorial, we have now much more people who understand what is Ukraine and where is it. I would say 50-50 people, and it's not bad, I would say. 2 people learned Ukrainian language who are not Ukrainians and not from the Slavic countries with Slavic background. They are Germans. They learned really good Ukrainian language. So it's also possible to learn this language. And I see and hear right now that Ukraine will be the topic for the generation. We need to have a good expertise in our newsroom from Ukraine. But they need people who will, they are common use. And when we have a good expert, then he will say, or she, yes, this is a great source, or I know where to prove. I will read Ukrainian sources, not Russian sources or something like that. So this is what has really changed. The second point, in positive way, I also really fight for the writing for the names in Ukrainian, not only people, but cities. And it's still, you can find mistakes from the other colleagues, but it's somehow now more or less a rule. This is small things, technical one, but it's really important actually to see in attitudes to the topic, and this is a sensibility. There is other side in my reporting. Yeah, TATS is from left spectrum from political point of view. And of course, there is also challenging when, for example, my reports from Avdiivka on one side of the page, on the second, professor or opinion leader writes, yes, we need to sit on the table with Russia. And so opposite something that I write in my report from the ground. It's challenging for me personally, but still I think it's something that we need to do it because then people can read both sides. Unfortunately, these experts sometimes are really loud in compared to the professional journalists, and people like discuss loud people, but not this really professional work. You risk your life, you bring the story, but then reaction or discussion will be not about suffering family in Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, Bakhmut, but what said this professor from somewhere, some university in Germany. I don't want to say that all professors in Germany have no expertise or something like that. You don't need to hear them. But yes, it's happened, and I change and I choose the strategy that I will continue to publish my stories despite this fact that in the same newspaper there is really bright opinions. And I also notice how change comments under my articles, how it was 2014 from not existing person to the yes, this is a great report, we need to do more, we need to support people. It's not only about sending weapons, but it's just on the level of people. So we now better understand why Ukrainians don't want to give up, why they really fight for this real peace, not on the paper. So there is some changes, but also a lot of challenges as well.
I would even say that it's kind of an identity crisis for Germany, because if you think of TATS, it's a left-wing newspaper, and normally the position of this left-wing newspaper is never send weapons anywhere. The Green Party had as a line like we never send weapons to war zones. And both actually, Green Party and TATS have quite a clear stance on supporting Ukraine. But are there debates it would be interesting to hear, are there debates within this newsroom on that?
It's not debates, it's fight. It's really fight because in summer I was 3 weeks as a deputy of my editor, and I faced with these challenges on my own. There is some crisis in Mali, or there is unexpected elections in France. But you have story from, let's say, Sumy, from the really, really hard point on the map in Ukraine. But other colleagues know my story is much more important than you, but you can wait. There is a war for many years, blah, blah, blah. So it's also challenging to bring story really on the front page. It's a fight about place, but also about the perspective. We have such a interesting system in newspaper that we have not our correspondent, but authors from the different regions. They're Ukrainians and they live in Ukraine and they bring stories in newspaper. It's also really good for readers to hear not only voices from journalists who are constantly working for the newspaper, but also journalists, but Ukrainian ones. And not all stories are really welcome from these colleagues because they are sometimes too patriotic. This criticism I hear really often, but still they are in newspaper, despite this critique. So there are a lot of fight in background, no one see it. But I think now every day we have story from Ukraine. And I think we are still winning this fight. My question to you was really practical one. Here you already told about the German society that something about war, it's not really welcomed to be covered. But what stories are more interesting? War reporting or maybe people stories? And how you can explain this trend? Because I will just answer from my side that stories from the front line is not really welcomed. Maybe it's wrong formulation, but people want to have more people story. Is it for you the same or maybe other? Because for TV, war reporting is much more visually interesting, I would say. Oh, I'm wrong.
It's a difficult question because, like, if you take programs like CNN, for example, they do proper frontline reporting and they go to the hottest possible places and do lives from there, and you hear explosions, and this is kind of what people watch a lot and people in the US want to see. Regarding our work, we try to tell stories of people. So if we go close to the front line, it's not just to be there and say we were close to the front line. This is not the way we report, but it's to tell the story of a soldier who became a soldier because he had no choice. It's showing the lives of people who are under constant shelling. It's going to places that have been under occupation, and then to tell the stories of the people, how was it, to show these perspectives. And this is something where we see there is a lot of interest, and showing more Ukrainian people with their different also perspectives and experiences and thoughts, and also in different parts of the country. This is what makes our work valuable. And also, again, these different kinds of media we can work for. For example, talking about diplomacy on television is really difficult. You can do it better on the radio, but you can sometimes even write better an article because people can read a sentence twice and then understand it better. Some things, very personal stories, are difficult to tell on television because people don't want to show their face. They do not open themselves up. It's really strong on radio. Sometimes I want to leave the flat, I listen to radio, I stay there to end the report because it's so strong and impressive. So I think it's a mix. We can't only be in Kyiv and report on things that are happening here. We need to travel around. But we should also always think, like, is it really necessary? So I think it's a constant thing we need to discuss. We need to discuss as a team here. We need to discuss as a team with the newsrooms in Germany. But maybe the last and important point, sometimes I feel also from what you described, you are here, you're on the ground, you are the expert. And if newsrooms show a lack of trust towards you, this is a big problem. I think this is the most important and basic thing, that your colleagues who are not here trust you. They can have discussions with you on specific approaches to your reporting and so on, but they need to trust you. And if this is not there, this is a problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Covering Ukraine. My name is Oksana Mamchenkova, and I'm your host and the Kyiv-based project coordinator for the Europe-Ukraine desk. Lyuba Gook edited, sound designed, and mixed this episode. The views expressed by these episode guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the media they work for, nor n-ost, nor the European Commission who funded this project. The podcast Covering Ukraine was created as a part of the Europe-Ukraine desk, a program that aims to build bridges between journalists from the EU and Ukraine. You can get in touch with us at eud@n-ost.org. Maybe consider telling a friend about this show if you liked it. You will hear from us soon. Take care.